In today's video, we're going to talk about how you farm in Rise of Kingdoms, but we're not farming resources, we're farming kills. Hello my friends and welcome back, I'm Chisgule Gaming, and in this video, sponsored by the makers of Rise of Kingdoms, I am going to give you several March combinations that are absolutely phenomenal for farming kills in KVK. And this is not something I typically spend a lot of time doing, but if you wanted to rack up a lot of kill points and actually be pretty effective in what you were doing, this is exactly what you would do and the marches you would use. Now, the premise for all of this is that you're able to teleport your city near or at the front line, and you are going to find groupings of enemies that are clustered up right outside an objective by a flag that they're trying to rally. Maybe it's a fort that they're trying to hit, and the marches have to stand there so they can reinforce the rally. So the premise is that you're going to find a cluster of enemies that are trying to reinforce a rally, and you are going to wreck them. Here's how. There are three kinds of combinations of marches, or maybe really two kinds and one all-around champion. Let's break it down like that. The two classifications of how you're going to farm is you're going to AOE farm and you are going to counterattack farm. And then I'm going to give you the all-around champion. Let's start with the AOE farmers. Verification why? As I was saying, we're going to start with the AOE farmers, and your goal with an AOE farming approach, which I didn't even think was a thing until this last KVK, is to take a commander that generates rage very quickly or has a low rage requirement, and you are going to hit a march that's not paying attention. You can't do this if they're like really hawking you and responding very quickly to your popping out of your city. But you're going to pop out of your city, you're going to hit somebody that's only sort of paying attention, and you're going to hit them with Khan Esong. And I know that's going to sound really weird. You're going to be like, just go Khan Esong. But Khan has a reduced rage requirement by 50 from his active skill, by another 100 over here, and Esong has a chance to generate rage, and then you're going to do AoE damage to everybody, and then you're going to jump back in your city, refresh the march, and do it over again until they're paying attention to you. You can do this a lot, and if you are a player that's invested in tech, you're actually going to be very difficult to deal with in the Season of Conquest. You can also use this in other seasons of KVK. As soon as you've got Khan and you've got Esong, this is something you can do. And the Esong in this instance is expertise for the AoE damage that's completely insane. But for the most part, you will try to be targeting folks that are all in front of you. So even with an unmaxed Esong, you could accomplish this. Now, if you wanted to upscale this march, and someone used this and it was honestly kind of terrifying how much damage they were doing, you could go and you could use XY instead of using the Khan. And my goodness, the XY has the 900 rage requirement off the top there, and then an additional 50 reduction if you had him expertise. Oh my gosh. And he does AoE. So you just wreck a whole bunch of semi-AFK, weak rally reinforcement marches, which is why, by the way, I feel like generally you try to reinforce garrisons defensively. That's where you put farms, not on rallies, because you send a farm to a rally and you got somebody using an XY like this with some gear and an Esong, and they're just going to do some insane damage to you and wreck your march. And you would be shocked if you just find the weak march and target it. Even if a bunch of people start swarming you, you probably end up trading pretty positive if you skill cycle and the enemy does not. You pop back into your city before they skill cycle, and that's how you AoE farm kills. You can do this in KVK. People do this, and that is how, in part, they get really high kill counts. But the next set of pairs I want to give you is the counterattackers. And the counterattacker strategy is to try to combine some amount of counterattack damage with some amount of instant proc damage. You can do all counterattack damage and just send your march and have its ad face and probably still trade positive potentially with the right combination. And these combinations are as follows. The absolute very best counterattacker, well, maybe I'll call this an instant procer combination, but it's also got counterattack. But the ultimate instant proc and counterattack combination is the Alex Herald, obviously. They both have instant proc damage. Alex has it on the second skill. Herald has it on the fourth skill. That's a 10% chance from Alex and a 20% chance from Harold that you get instant proc damage. You pop back into your city right after that's happened. They don't get to skill cycle you, and you got instant proc damage on them. You do this over and over and over until you clear them out of the way. You could do Charles and Alex. You could do Harold and Charles. You could do Pakal and Charles. You could do Pakal and Harold. I mean, all of these different combinations can go and use the combination of instant proc damage and counterattack damage to make it so that you're doing a lot of damage out. Even if they start swarming you, you do a bunch of counterattack damage back, and it's just not profitable. It makes it very difficult for the enemy to trade positive with you, and you can farm up a lot of kills this way, like a really shocking amount of kills this way. And if you are a player that is teched up, it's really gross. But even without the tech, the instant proc damage really can seal the deal. And this is something that most people can do because, I mean, I would advise that you have an Alex expertise. You should be able to do this. Even with just a 5-5-1-1 Alexander the Great, you can do this because you don't need to skill cycle, which is what some of these other skills are focused on, at least a little bit. Now, the final pairing I want to give you technically qualifies as one of these counter-attacker pairs, but it's the all-around best kill farming march, I think in the game. I think Alex Harold could give this a run for its money, but Alex Harold really requires you to be popping out of your city and doing stuff. This march you can take with you wherever you go, and that's Attila Takeda. Now, look, let me be really clear and say that I personally am not using Attila Takeda because I'm not trying to farm kills. I'm trying to clear the field of enemies, okay? So I'm trying to center my attention around an objective, clear the field around that objective so we can do what we need to do, and then burn the flag. But if what you wanted to do was farm a lot of kills and cause a lot of damage, and I should have been doing more of this. I have the Attila Takeda. I also should have been doing more of this when I wasn't in the field because the enemy was too numerous. I should have switched to a counter-attacker mode. I'm going to talk about that in a second too. But you send the Attila Takeda targeting something weak. They swarm and even potentially will sad face your Attila Takeda. Doesn't matter. You will probably trade positive if you have successfully targeted the weakest reinforcement to the rally that you can find. And if they're just standing there, all the better, right? So Attila Takeda is extremely good for that. They also could be used in Altar of Darkness and in Ruins, and they work really well there. They also can be used for running around and killing farmers, which is another reason why they're high on this list. And if they start to swarm you while you're killing farmers, it's honestly not even the end of the world there. Like, you fight them, you get sad-faced, and you probably trade decently from that. So Attila Takeda is the ultimate march, not necessarily because it's the best for city pop-outs. I don't think it is. But because it can do that and so many things so well that you can farm a lot of kills, and people will go and they will hit this march, even though they're not teched up, even though they're T4 and you're T5, and take just a ton of counterattack damage and get into some major trouble. So the flip side of this is that you should potentially be avoiding hitting Attila Takeda if you're not a teched up player, if you're not a T5 player. You just focus other things, which gives yet another reason why Attila Takeda does so well in the field, is that often they are the wrong thing to target, which means that if you're trying to farm up a bunch of kills, you can get a lot of work done for quite a long period of time with Attila Takeda because you're being ignored. And I mean, the Takeda's even brought the healing, which really wrecks you with Gilgamesh, but it almost doesn't matter because they're attacking archers and ear cavalry, and like, it's not the worst thing in the world for you, given that even though Gilgamesh will do damage when you heal, it's honestly, like, it's not great. And in fact, you know what? You want to see the video about that? I'll have a card up in the top where I've got testing showcasing exactly the interaction between Gilgamesh and Takeda. Now, this brings me to my final point, which is, what do I feel like I should have been doing in my last KVK to try to just really soften up the enemy and probably trade positive and just clean up the field, even though we had absolutely no field control in certain situations? What would I have done? If I were doing it again, I would bring the following 3 marches. I would take Attila Takeda, and I would suit that up with my cav gear. I would take my Alex Harold, and I would suit that up with some really great infantry gear. And last but not least, I would take Pakal and Charles, because they have a lot of counterattack damage. I would suit them up, and I would bring them out onto the field. And what I would do is I would go and I would target a weak march as I was describing, and I would hit it, and they would have to swarm my marches, and they would get sad-faced, and I probably would still trade very positive overall, because these are not marches that you can swarm down very easily, and I'm a max tech player typically, right? I've got a ton of troops in my march. I was the freaking Viking civilization for 3% extra counterattack damage. I mean, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to see how it works anyways. So try it out. I should have tried it out. And I bet you I will trade pretty positive with these marches. The Attila Takeda, the Pakal with the Charles. And, you know, I could interchange this a little bit. Like I could do Charles Harold and Pakal Alex. Like whatever I wanted to do there. You could mix that up a little bit, right? Those marches, I think, because of their counterattack damage, because of their extent to which they reduce the damage you take, would soften the field and trade positive. And I think that's actually really valuable in a KVK situation when you're outnumbered. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is sort of the micro optimizations around this. Yeah, there's a little bit you could do with talent builds. That's going to depend a lot on who your primary commander is, but I want to hone in for just a second on equipment. I think that some of the best equipment you could use if you had access to just about everything would be to look at the following accessories. First and foremost, the Horn of Fury. If you're not using a instant proc damage dealer, then you need to skill cycle, which means you need to skill cycle fast. I think Horn of Fury is really good for that. So for the AOE farmers like XY Esong and Khan Esong, I think this is very, very important. Use a Horn of Fury. For the counterattackers, I think that it is really helpful, and this goes for every pair that you're bringing, but it's especially helpful for the counterattackers where you are going to get kind of sad-faced, that you bring either, and preferably, the Vengeance for 8% extra counterattack damage, or even Greatest Glory does something sort of similar. So normal attacks is the damage that you're dealing to the target, and also the damage you deal out to anyone who hits you. So this 5% boost is actually pretty nice. Not as good for pure counterattack like Vengeance is, but also is relevant for that. So a Greatest Glory would be pretty reasonable for that. And the sort of, I guess, accessories you could use at the Epic tier that are also really helpful if you're making kind of the optimized perfect set for this would be to reduce the counterattack damage that you take. So because you're trying to hit one march and then skill cycle before anybody realizes you're there, reducing the counterattack damage you're taking is actually pretty good. They're not going to skill cycle you, theoretically, right? Because you got better rage generation from your AOE farmers. So all you're taking is the counterattack damage and normal attack damage, right? So you go in, you reduce the counterattack damage you take. I think that's a pretty solid choice. If you wanted to soften the damage that you're taking before you go and you skill cycle, I think this is probably less relevant if you're going to sad face your marches, because, I mean, they're going to swarm you out anyways, either way. And I don't think there's a great epic accessory for that situation. Certainly, it's not Peter's sickle over here, okay? If you've got any other ideas for how to go and farm kills, specifically around objectives, right? So it's not just like purely farming for, I don't know, farming's sake. I made a detailed video that's all about getting to 30 million kills. That's not really what this is about. This is about the best marches you could use to farm up a bunch of kills really quickly and efficiently. And I think that those combinations we shared, the AOE farmers, the counterattackers, and the all-rounder, can get you just a ridiculous amount of kills. But again, let me know down below in the comments if you want to see my longer video about just getting to 30 million kills in general, what it takes and efficiency, and how I did that in my restart project, which was not a max tech account. I'll have a card up in the top for that video. And until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.